There are women who disappear slowly, so slowly that no one notices, not even themselves. Carol Whitfield knew this better than most. The morning it finally cracked open for her began the way most of her mornings did. 5:47, the Cuisinart gurgling on the kitchen counter, the smell of dark roast moving through the downstairs rooms like something gentle and familiar, October light coming through the window above the sink, thin, gray, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. She stood at the counter in her robe, both hands wrapped around her mug, and watched a single oak leaf press itself against the glass, then let go. She was 61 years old. She had lived in this house for 22 years. She could not remember the last time someone had asked her what she thought about something that mattered. Dennis came downstairs at 6:15, already in his jacket, already checking his phone. He moved through the kitchen the way he moved through most spaces, as if it had been arranged specifically for him, as if the coffee had brewed itself out of courtesy. He poured his cup without looking at her. He said the Hendersons were coming to the banquet Friday. He said she should wear the navy dress, not the burgundy one, because the burgundy one photographed dark. He said this the way someone might note that rain was expected, informational, impersonal, closed. She said nothing. The silence between them had texture now. It had weight. After 31 years, she had learned to read it the way she once read case files, scanning for what was present, more than what was said. She had been very good at reading people once, that night, at the Pattersons' dinner party. And this was 3 weeks before the banquet, 3 weeks before everything. Someone asked. A woman named Judith, a retired school principal with reading glasses on a beaded chain, leaned across the table and said, warmly and with genuine curiosity, "Carol, what did you do before all this? Did you work?" The table quieted by half a degree. Dennis answered before Carol's mouth fully opened. Carol's retired, a small smile, a hand briefly on her arm. She never really had a career. She had a job for a few years. Then she got smart and let me take care of things. Laughter moved around the table, light, comfortable, the kind of laughter that fills a room so nothing else can. Judith smiled politely and turned to someone else. Carol picked up her wine glass. She set it back down. She felt the words somewhere in the middle of her chest. Not as pain exactly, but as pressure. The specific pressure of something being pressed flat that did not want to be flat. She had felt it before. She knew the shape of it. She had simply stopped naming it somewhere around year 9, because naming it changed nothing and exhausted everything. She had a job for a few years. She had been a licensed clinical social worker. She had carried a caseload of 31 at-risk youth in Franklin County. She had talked a 14-year-old boy off a highway overpass on a February night, when the wind chill was 12 below and her hands had gone completely numb, and she had stayed on that overpass for 2 hours and 40 minutes until the boy sat down and let her put her coat around his shoulders. She had been 3 months from beginning a doctoral program, but Dennis needed her home, and it had felt, at the time, like love. It had felt like the wise and generous thing. In the basement, behind the water heater, on the second shelf of the metal storage unit Dennis used for tax files and holiday boxes, there was a gray steel document box with a combination lock. The combination was her daughter's birthday. She had not opened it in 11 years. She thought about it that night while Dennis slept. She lay on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about that box the way you think about something you've been pretending isn't there. By morning, she knew she was going to open it. She did not yet know why. Before we go any further, if you're new here, take a second right now and subscribe. These stories go up every week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming. And I want to ask you something in the comments. Where in the world are you watching this from? What time is it there right now, and how old are you? I ask because these stories travel somewhere I never expect, and I want to know who's on the other end. Tell me, I read every one. Now, that box. She went down on a Saturday morning while Dennis was at the club. The basement smelled the way it always did. Concrete and cedar and the faint chemical sweetness of the dryer sheets she bought in bulk from Costco. The overhead fluorescent took a second to catch, humming and flickering before it steadied. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the storage shelf the way you look at something you have been circling for a long time, without admitting you were circling it. The box was exactly where Shed left it. Gray steel, combination lock, a thin film of dust across the lid that her finger cut through cleanly when she reached for it. 3 numbers. Her daughter's birthday, April 14th, 91. The lock released with a sound like a small bone snapping. She lifted the lid. The smell hit her first. Old paper, something faintly like lavender, which she couldn't explain and didn't try to. Her clinical license was on top, laminated, slightly yellowed at the edges. Carol Ann Whitfield, licensed clinical social worker, state of Ohio. The expiration date was 1999. She had let it lapse the year their youngest started kindergarten because renewing it would have meant acknowledging she intended to go back, and Dennis had said gently, reasonably, that there was no point in paying the fee for something she wasn't using. She had agreed with him. She had agreed with him about so many things that felt, at the time, like practicality. Beneath the license was the doctoral acceptance letter from Ohio State. She did not read it all the way through. She read the first line, "We are pleased to offer you admission," and then she folded it back exactly as it had been and held it in both hands for a moment without moving. Beneath that was the commendation from Franklin County Children's Services, and beneath that, in a white envelope with her name written in careful block letters, was the letter from the boy on the overpass. His name was Marcus. She knew without opening it what it said because she had read it so many times in the first years that she had memorized it. He was a family court judge now. She had found him once on LinkedIn 7 years ago, and then closed the tab and never looked again because it made something in her sternum feel like a fist unclenching, and she wasn't ready for that. She sat down on the cold concrete floor with the box in her lap. She did not cry. The cold moved up through the floor and into her bones, and she let it. Because it was real and specific, and it belonged to her. That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, Renee Patterson called. Renee had been Dennis' executive assistant for 14 years. Carol had met her at company events, exchanged the careful pleasantries of women who exist on opposite sides of the same man. Polite, warm enough, never quite real. She was a trim woman with natural silver locks and the precise diction of someone who had learned very early that being underestimated was a liability she could not afford. She said she was calling to confirm the table arrangements for Friday's banquet. Then she paused, and in that pause, a pause Carol recognized from years of clinical practice as the pause before the thing someone actually called to say, Renee's voice shifted by half a degree. "Carol, I want you to know something." A breath. "I have been watching that man for 14 years. And I think you and I should have coffee before Friday. Not because of the seating chart." The kitchen was very quiet. The Cuisinart had stopped. The oak tree outside the window was perfectly still. Carol's hand tightened around the phone. "When?" she said. It was the first word she had spoken in 2 days that felt entirely like her own. They met at a Panera on Morse Road, the one near the Kroger, on a Friday morning 3 hours before the banquet. Renee was already there when Carol arrived, sitting at a corner table with a large coffee and a manila folder that she did not open immediately. She let Carol settle. She let her take her coat off and wrap both hands around her cup. Then she looked at her the way someone looks at you when they have decided to tell you the truth, regardless of what it costs them. "I want to show you something," Renee said. "And I want you to understand that I have been deciding whether to do this for about 4 years. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, performance review documents, a typed log of dates and incidents. She had formatted it like a legal document, column headers, timestamps, everything. Carol recognized the structure immediately. It was the same structure she had used in Franklin County when she was building a case file on a household. Methodical, irrefutable, the work of someone who understood that feelings without documentation are just feelings. Renee watched her read. "He does it to the women on the floor," Renee said quietly. "The way he talks over them in meetings. The way he credits their work to the men above them. There is a woman named Priya who wrote the entire regional restructuring proposal. Her name appears nowhere in the final presentation." A pause. "His name is on the cover page." Carol read without speaking. The emails were worse than the log. In one, Dennis wrote to a senior director that a female associate's concerns were more emotional than operational and should be managed accordingly. In another, dated 4 years ago, he described a junior analyst who had raised a compliance concern as not quite ready for the pressure of this level. She had been let go 6 weeks later. Carol turned to the last page. It was a letter written by 4 women, collectively, addressed to the board, dated 2 months ago and, as of today, unsubmitted. Held, Renee explained, because they were afraid, because he was receiving an award Friday night, and the optics felt impossible and they did not believe anyone would listen. "Why are you bringing this to me?" Carol said. Renee folded her hands around her cup. "Because you were a social worker. Because you spent years building cases for people who had no power in rooms that were not designed for them." She paused. "And because I have watched you sit at 12 company dinners and smile and say nothing. And I know that is not who you are. I know what that costs." Something moved through Carol's chest, not warmth. Something older than warmth. Something that felt like a door she had been leaning against for a very long time suddenly having a handle. She took the folder. She spent the afternoon at her kitchen table. She read everything twice. She took notes in the margins in the small, precise handwriting she had used in case files. Abbreviations she had not used in decades that came back to her fingers without effort, the way a language does when you grew up speaking it before you were told to stop. At 4 o'clock she went upstairs. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. She did not look at her face the way she normally did, cataloging, correcting, preparing herself to be looked at by others. She looked at it differently, the way she used to look at a room before entering it professionally. Reading what was there, what was workable, she opened the closet. She did not take out the navy dress. She took out a dark charcoal blazer she had bought 3 years ago and never worn because Dennis said it made her look severe. She put it on. From downstairs, she heard Dennis' car pull into the garage. She heard him come in through the side door. She heard him call her name with the particular upward lilt he used when he needed something and assumed she was available. She did not answer. The Worthington Grand Ballroom smelled of warmed bread rolls and gardenias, and the specific cologne of men who believed the evening belonged to them. Round tables with white linens, centerpieces of ivory roses, a podium at the front of the room with the company logo backlit in blue. Dennis moved through the pre-dinner reception the way he always moved through rooms like this. Handshakes, laughter, a hand briefly on someone's shoulder, the easy authority of a man who had never once walked into a professional space and wondered if he was supposed to be there. Carol walked in beside him. She was wearing the charcoal blazer. He noticed, she saw it register in the slight tightening around his eyes. Not anger, just the reflexive recalibration of a man encountering something outside his expectations. He said nothing. He introduced her to the board chair and his wife. And Carol shook hands and smiled and said the correct things. And all the while the manila folder was in Renee's bag at table 7. And at table 7 sat 4 women who had written a letter that had not yet been sent. Dinner was served. The speeches began. Dennis Award was last. The regional VP of HR, a man named Gerald with a practiced warmth that did not reach his eyes, took the podium and began the introduction. Words like legacy and leadership and the kind of integrity that sets the standard. Carol sat with her hands in her lap and her spine perfectly straight, and her breathing slow and even. The way she had learned to breathe on an overpass in February when everything depended on staying calm inside a situation that was not calm. Renee, from across the room, met her eyes. Carol stood up, not dramatically, not loudly, she simply stood, the way you stand when you are certain of where you are going, and she walked to the podium with the measured, unhurried pace of someone who had done harder things in harder rooms. Gerald stopped mid-sentence. The room went very quiet. Dennis' face did something complicated. Carol set her hands on either side of the podium. She looked out at the room, at the board members, the junior staff, the women at table 7 who had stopped breathing, and she spoke in the voice she had not used in 28 years. The one that was trained for exactly this. Calm, precise, load-bearing. My name is Carol Whitfield. I was a licensed clinical social worker for 9 years before I left my career to support this man's. I want to tell you something about legacy. She spoke for 4 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She cited dates. She cited the emails by subject line and recipient. She named Priya. She named the analyst who had raised the compliance concern. She described the letter at table 7, written by 4 women whose names she read aloud, one at a time, slowly, so the room could hear each one. Dennis said her name once, sharply, the way you say a word when you are trying to stop it from meaning something. She did not look at him. When she finished, she stepped back from the podium. The room was so quiet she could hear the ice settling in the water glasses. Gerald's mouth was open. The board chair had his phone in his hand. At table 7, one of the women was crying without making any sound. The award was not presented that evening. It was not presented at all. In the weeks that followed, HR opened a formal review. 3 of the 4 women filed official complaints. Priya's authorship of the restructuring proposal was entered into the public record. Dennis resigned in November, quietly, with language in the statement about pursuing other opportunities. Carol reactivated her clinical license in January. It cost her $420 and a continuing education requirement she completed in 11 days. She kept the commendation from Franklin County on her desk. She kept Marcus' letter beside it in the white envelope, unfolded now, open. Some reckonings don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, dressed in the ordinary clothes of a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, everything is different. Carol Whitfield had waited 28 years for her Wednesday. She just didn't know it was coming dressed like a charcoal blazer she had bought 3 years ago and never worn.